buenas, dentro del campo, la radio en New York no la tengo. Yo Biden, por favor, nítido, yo soy nítido. Por favor, reimarte. Nítido. Esos pueblitos de UFO son bebés. ¿Qué vas a hacer cuando se acorde el Consejo de Seguridad Infinito? Bebés. Nítido. Lo mayor de la bebida él es patrimonio de la humanidad. Hasta en Estados Unidos tenemos la lista de patentes del verde naranja. Hasta en Estados Unidos tenemos la lista de patentes del verde naranja. No permitimos en su IP nada que no sea rime. Y no tengo México ni Canadá. Del verde y naranja la lista, patrimonio de la humanidad. Es porque no quiero el término. Y ser simplemente va como el presidente la bestia. Y no le dan en el edificio, pero estoy dentro de la atmósfera y me para el tiempo. Ese simplemente sube a la seña y su familia más pringada es Nanny y Homer de los Simpsons, Maggie y May, Peggy School. I wish I never see your face. Maggie, it's late September, and I wish I never see your face. Que me perdone Nanny, y yo a él no le perdono. ¿El qué? Tenéis la lista, es patrimonio de la humanidad. ¿Sabéis? Va la bestia, el presidente Joe Biden. Y sabéis, no le doy ni con misiles. Según la Guerra Fría. Eso lo veo ducha, lo veo durmiendo, lo veo. Sube a pringao, el hermano. El gran hermano. Es patrimonio de la humanidad.
Corruption scandals, and many South Africans have grown disillusioned with the party. Here's South African political commentator and author Justice Malone.
Many in South Africa regard the ANC as the antithesis of Mandela. No matter how much the party attempts to banish its name using Mandela's image, the public just isn't buying it anymore.
30 years ago, South Africa became an emblem of democracy. What's the legacy of that milestone, and what does that mean for this upcoming election? Rosique is a South African broadcaster and journalist. She recently relocated to Washington, D.C. and joins me now.
Pues simplemente no debo a él.
Oh, it was autumn, what you call the fall. It was warm but got chilly later on in the afternoon. I was at the...
Tenéis la lista hasta en Estados Unidos, patrimonio de la humanidad. Eso simplemente voy al sueño. O las mujeres a de liga.
So there was this kind of intergenerational celebration and marking of the moment. The queues were long, the adults around us were just so ecstatic, and even children understood the enormity of the moment. But as a teenager, I understood the political significance.
I mean, we heard from NPR's interviews that day just the swelling sense of optimism that you're recalling. But then the ANC takes power, Mandela is in charge of things. What were some of the first noticeable changes for day-to-day life once apartheid had ended and black South Africans were a full part of society?
I think one of the things I can remember is that we were getting along, black and white. Of course, it doesn't mean all that pain, all the chasm, all the structural injustices are gone. But if you came to South Africa at that time, you would find joint celebrations over the outcome of a football match or soccer match. And the years following our democracy, yes, you can say they were jubilant, but there was a lot of work to do. We had the Truth and Reconciliation Commission where all that horrible brutality was articulated and expressed. We were putting together a constitution, the first constitution. But the second thing that I remember, there were a lot of promises. And I think that's why today is also painful, because we remember the promises of free education, free water, free electricity, a clean, inclusive government. And, well, we can talk about the distance between the hope and the promise and where we are
Questa è un'atmosfera di varia tempo da pronuncia, del luto.
Looking back 30 years is that 30 years is one of those periods.
Andiamo adelante, c'è la cocaina,
But for a country, it's really not that long.
i grandi miedo pegando
That very long apartheid era that still show
el
themselves
lujo.
here and there in South African society.
I would say that there are remnants of apartheid that show themselves in South African society. One, that free electricity and water that we were promised. It may have been caused by the apartheid government, having black people live in underdeveloped environments far from working opportunities and, the gentrification, spatial development. That is the responsibility of the apartheid government. But I think anybody who has a modicum of decency and values the truth must acknowledge that the ANC government has continued those patterns of arrangements and oppression. What I mean by that is that there are areas in South Africa that have never seen clean water come out of a tap. And some of them live next to rivers, by the way, but you need infrastructure to make water a reality, or the delivery thereof a reality. There are others who have not experienced the joy of electricity. But I can tell you now, the one thing that breaks my heart as a journalist, as a black child from South Africa, is that there are children who still have to cross rivers to get to school because the government has not built roads. So that is an apartheid picture that the ANC did nothing to fix, and that's a reality.
And this frustration and agitation that you feel when you're talking to your peers and friends, people who are underage, I'm wondering, does that color your retrospective views on 1994 and that big breakthrough moment at all? Or do you think these are two separate things? This was establishing a new government and then how government is played out over time.
These are completely two separate things. I'll tell you what. We could not endure another minute of oppression where we can't vote in our own country. We couldn't endure another moment of police brutality, another moment of being excluded from quality education and quality health. So for black people, it was important that the shackles of apartheid are broken. Nothing can ever undo the significance and the urgency of that moment. Regardless of the nonsense that the ANC is subjecting us to, apartheid had to fall. And it is not helpful, and I think it is hypocritical and revisionist to look back at history and say, 1994 couldn't have meant anything because we've got problems now. No. I got an education today as a black woman because I could go to university and get access to the kind of education that my grandparents didn't have. So let's not diminish the importance of breaking apartheid, because all over the world it is not good for humanity to have a hierarchy, to have toxic power relations in society where people are condemned to a life of subjugation. So breaking apartheid remains important. Having a progressive constitution remains important, but it is heartbreaking to reflect on how the face of poverty in South Africa is still poor. It is the face of poverty is still black. And that is because the current government, a democratically elected government, has squandered the opportunities, I think.
You have kids, right? A 10 and a 7-year-old?
Yes, 10 and 7.
Can
That's
I
right,
ask-
girls.
Can I ask what you've told them, how you tell them the story of what happened in 1994 and what that moment felt like and meant?
Okay, so my children do appreciate the specialness, the uniqueness of coming from a country that produced Nelson Mandela.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I do recall on the day that Nelson Mandela was buried in the rural Eastern Cape, at his house in Johannesburg, where I lived, My daughter was 2 months old, and I decided to put her in a car seat and drive to Mandela's house 4 kilometers away. I don't know what that is in miles, but it's about 2.5 miles, I think. We drove there, I parked, and I joined South Africans of all races, all ages, as we danced in the streets, threw flowers on the pavement. It was a celebratory moment. I'm getting goosebumps as I tell you. And so I tell my daughter all the time that, you know, my darling, for 2 months of your life, you breathed the same air as Nelson Mandela. My children have always gone to multiracial schools, and they talk about racism as something that shocks them, that I can't believe there was a time where this was not allowed. Why did it happen? Why did it happen? And I teach them that we shouldn't allow it to happen. I can't believe Nelson Mandela spent 27 years in jail. He wasn't the only one. We should never, ever build a world where people are sent to jail all because they want equality. So they understand that South Africa is a special place because of that. They understand that we chose reconciliation over war. And those who are beating the drums of war today, talking about radicalism, talking about how we haven't fixed our country, racism, all of that, those things are still there. But war is never the right choice. We call them peacetime revolutionaries who talk so glibly around how Nelson Mandela sold out. Nelson Mandela did not sell out. He used the tools that he had, he and his peers, to get us to a certain point. It is our responsibility then to build our country. He can't be blamed for the fact that we are not a caring society. We are not affording socio-economic rights to so many who are poor. So what I tell my daughters is that you are special because you come from South Africa, but you are not absolved of your responsibility to build a just world. I mean, my children are talking about what's happening in the Middle East. They're talking about Russia and Ukraine, but the tone is empathy, because I think that's where we want to start.
Rosique, a South African broadcaster and journalist now based in Washington, D.C. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.
You're listening to All Things Considered from NPR News.
WNYC supporters include Carnegie Hall, presenting the Bavarian Radio Symphony Orchestra led by Sir Simon Rattle in 2 programs, one featuring Mahler, Hindemith, and Zelensky, the other Beethoven, Wagner, and Thomas Addis, May 2nd and 3rd. Tickets at carnegiehall.org.
About 600,000 people go missing every year in the U.S., prompting family members to become amateur detectives. On the trail of one missing person is journalist Tanya Mosley.
Why do you think you hesitated when we first met in telling me the full details about your mother's disappearance?
It's heartbreaking. I didn't want to break your heart.
I'm Kai Ray. Tanya Mosley joins me live next time on Notes from America. Tonight at 6 on WNYC.
That conversation with Kai and Tanya happening just about 40 minutes from now. The Notes from America crew in studio getting ready. That's coming up at 6 o'clock. Making headlines this weekend, one of the stories we're watching in the WNYC newsroom, local leaders are hoping to restore a discontinued ferry line between Staten Island and southern Brooklyn. Councilmember Justin Brennan says a ferry between the St. George Terminal on Staten Island to the 96th Street Pier in Brooklyn would offer New Yorkers in the area a much faster commute.
Staten Island is not only the least served borough by the fast ferry service, but it's got some of the greatest need. Obviously, it's got the famous Staten Island ferry, but they're not connected in the way that they should be to the NYC ferry system.
Brennan and fellow councilmember Camilla Hanks wrote in a letter to Mayor Adams that a typical commute between the two boroughs usually takes more than 90 minutes. The 1.5-mile ferry service ran between the two boroughs for 75 years until it was shut down when the Verrazano Narrows Bridge opened in 1964. More of All Things Considered coming your way, including this. We'll have the winner announced of the 31st annual Best Baguette in Paris competition. Stay with us for that coming up here on WNYC. And stay with us for the forecast because it's a good one. 84 if you like warm weather. 84 degrees for your Monday. 77 now.
Support for NPR comes from WNYC members and from Linda Mood Bell Learning Centers. Summer instruction for students to catch up or get ahead. Live online or in-person instruction for reading, comprehension, and math. lindamoodbell.com/NPR. And Progressive Insurance. Progressive is looking for dedicated and forward-thinking individuals to join their growing team. More information, including application, at progressive.com/careers.
In yesterday's show, we talked to Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders, who defended the protests sweeping college campuses against charges of anti-Semitism.
When you have a significant majority of the American people who, among other things, do not support more U.S. military aid to Netanyahu's war machine, we're not going to suggest that all of those people are anti-Semitic.
This evening, we are hearing from some of the Jewish students at Columbia University who met with House Speaker Mike Johnson last week, and as NPR's Barbara Sprunt reports, they have a different point of view.
Mike Johnson stepped onto campus as tension remains high between the administration and students who have erected encampments as they call for the university to divest from companies that operate in Israel. The crowd loudly booed the House Speaker.
A growing number of students have chanted in support of terrorists. They have chased down Jewish students. They have mocked them and reviled them. They have shouted racial epithets. They have screamed at those who bear the Star of David. Enjoy your free speech.
While protesters chanted over Johnson, Jewish students at an earlier private meeting with him and other GOP lawmakers said they were grateful a leading political figure listened to their stories in person.
For him to hear them firsthand and not just to see third-party videos was very powerful.
That's Xavier Westergaard, a PhD student. He said Johnson told the group he'd call President Biden to ask what executive action could be taken to help Jewish students who feel unsafe because of various anti-Semitic speech and harassment they say they faced on and off of campus from protesters.
Jewish students, including myself, have been the victims of physical violence, intimidation. This goes from shoving, spitting, being told to go back to Europe. And this is not just happening outside the gates. This was actually on campus.
Protesters say their demonstration has been peaceful and that some of the anti-Semitic events that have gotten online attention are coming from actors outside of campus. But Westergaard says he's experiencing anti-Semitism on campus.
I've heard, we want all Zionists off campus. I've heard death to the Zionist state, death to America, death to Zionists. And as a Jew, I feel that Zionism and Judaism can be teased apart with a tremendous amount of care and compassion and knowledge. But it's also just a dog whistle that people use when they're talking about the Jews.
Juliana Castillo, a history and philosophy major, was also in the meeting with lawmakers. She said the concerns of some Jewish students aren't only about physical safety.
There are things like intimidation, like feeling uncomfortable being openly Jewish, or feeling uncomfortable taking a direct route across campus. And it doesn't always manifest as a lack of physical safety. Sometimes it manifests as feeling unwelcome in a class, or feeling like people's viewpoints or perspectives are not respected.
Eliana Golden, a junior, was part of a group of Jewish students who received a message from a rabbi associated with Columbia, saying he recommended they go home and stay there until the situation on campus improves.
It was definitely wild to receive that text, but I think he did the hard thing and made the right call, because I witnessed it myself.
She said some Jewish students are debating whether to return to campus after the Passover holiday.
I know some people who are very, very afraid and don't want to come back to campus and who want to transfer.
New York Republican Congressman Anthony D'Esposito, who joined Johnson on campus, said the administration has failed to make all students feel they are safe and welcome.
They are really concerned that their voices are not being heard when they make complaints about, again, being assaulted, being spit on, being told that all Jews should die, and they are not getting any response from the individuals who are literally being paid to protect them.
A group of Democrats also visited Columbia this week, including North Carolina Congresswoman Kathy Manning. She wants Congress to take action to address anti-Semitism and says it's not limited to universities.
I find that deeply disturbing that in the United States of America, people are now afraid to be recognized in public as being Jewish.
There's a variety of measures the House can take up addressing anti-Semitism, and the chamber already has one bill with bipartisan support slated for the week ahead. Barbara Sprunt, NPR News, Washington.
In Spain, one topic has been dominating conversation since Wednesday. That's when Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez published a letter with an announcement. He was considering stepping down permanently. It was going to take 5 days to make a decision. That decision is now due tomorrow. What is going on here? Miguel Macias joins us now from Seville to explain. Hey, Miguel.
Hey, how's it going?
I mean, that's pretty dramatic. What's going on here?
So there's a lot of background here, Scott. So let me try to break it down. On Wednesday afternoon, Sanchez polished a 3.5-page letter on social media without warning to anyone that we know, addressing citizens directly. Earlier that day, it became known that a judge had accepted opening an investigation into Sanchez's wife, Begoña Gomez, allegedly using her position to influence decisions having to do with public funding of private companies, basically. Now, we should make this clear. The lawsuit that prompted the investigation was filed by a far-right organization that mainly exists to do just that, file mostly bogus lawsuits against politicians on the left. In this case, they based their suit on news clips from far-right media outlets, some of them known for publishing fake news. So Sanchez's reaction is not really just about this case. This case is basically the straw that broke the camel's back for him. Sanchez and his wife have been targets of a campaign from the far right that we could say amounts to harassment at times. So Sanchez is known to be a survivor, to have a very thick skin, but it seems that opponents have finally found his weakness, and that is the well-being of his wife.
So I just want to clarify, right now, so we know the reputation of where the information came from. Do we know, is there any facts out there on the validity of the charge itself at this point in time?
It is very unclear at the moment. The one thing that we know is that the judge did not consult with the public attorney's office, which is kind of a routine process for them to do when they receive a lawsuit like this. So the suggestion here is that
¿Sabéis
there is a certain
cuánto sabéis en la Tierra es si la tarjeta de una donadora
information out there indicates that
y me den el periódico?
in this lawsuit,
¿No lo veis?
even the organization that
Ir al ñaña, no, al
it
Telepizza.
might be fake, but that would be the
La
judge's
tarjeta de una donadora y me den el periódico.
A lot of the reasons that this was
La
surprising is that
Patrimonio de la Humanidad, sus patentes.
why that is.
That's right. Sanchez has persevered against all odds for years now. In fact, I'll tell you one particular moment. Back in 2016, he was ousted as Secretary General from his
Patrimonio de la
while
Humanidad.
he was the leader of the opposition. The establishment of the Socialist Party had another leader in mind, Susana Díaz. Well,
Porque
Sanchez ran again in the
me
primaries
hablan
with
desde
no terms,
New
and won the
York,
primaries to become Secretary General again. Then he went on to
y
talk with his service in
está viendo en 4K, ahí no padea.
and since then he has
Son
managed to remain
1080,
power through a number
mira,
of
lo
complicated
pongo sin
conditions.
sonido.
The latest of those
A ver, los
conditions was
rusos,
just last year when Sanchez
en
lost the
1080,
popular vote in the summer general elections to conservatives,
inferiores,
but he managed to
inferiores,
Congress, including the
coméntalas, inferiores, el UFO cena, que si no, no cena,
I mean,
eso.
I'm wondering what the response is, and I'm
Delirón.
also wondering what the thinking is of this particular step, saying I might resign several days from now. I mean, I
Y
feel
va
like that
pata,
is
eso.
particularly unusual and particularly dramatic for
Os comenta, sois inferiores, ¿sabes? Una hora y tarjeta, y le den las noticias, eso.
hours and hours of conversation about this.
Luego,
No one knows.
que si la bandera era azul marino, verde
Now
limón,
we're on the eve of his decision.
o verde,
But now when it comes to the
el
election,
amarillo.
there are two sides, the left, and not just the
La base del
socialists, but
imperio,
all parties on the left have come together.
la base de su vida es el imperio alemán.
Supporters yesterday
Y ahora los nazis van de soy ruso, que ya lo tienen, eso, y eran soviéticos.
As I said, Sanchez is known for
Y él está al 30, ¿qué te crees? Eso, lo estoy midiendo en ordenador, eso. Esa se lo toma a propósito del amianto, eso. Y la tengo igual, en la CBS. ¿De dónde ha salido esto? ¿A dónde vas y de dónde vienes?
We'll see what happens on his
Me
self-imposed
voy.
deadline. Miguel Macias from
¿A dónde vas y de dónde vienes? Eso. Estamos en muerte. Estamos en muerte.
A rocket launched last week in China that shot 3
La luna no, en Marte.
Well, Secretary of State Antony Blinken was visiting Beijing. Now, the timing was probably a coincidence. China's launch schedule is set far in advance and usually is not focused on the diplomatic calendar. But as NPR's John Ruick reports from the launch site in the Gobi Desert, the mission was a reminder that Beijing has big plans.
Outside the Launch Center living quarters of the three astronauts who were about to walk out and start their journey skyward, a flag-waving crowd was assembled to see them off.
It's almost like a carnival atmosphere here. I'm standing outside where these three astronauts are going to come out in their spacesuits.
Pero sabe esto es la vida. O sea, hasta sé, soy nominado, si me merezco, sabe esto es la vida.
The space program is a huge point of pride for China.
Con aceitunas donde yo juráis. ¿De quién es esa? ¿O el plomo para el congelador? Porque van al sueño, a la seña, eso es algo de mi objetivo, eso se traje la hora, me veo todos los días. Every day.
We hope that through this research we can understand the interaction between these plants and animals in space, so that in the future
Salió a la Haya, no le di una joven,
a self-sustaining large ecosystem that he says they hope can
a joven nunca la tocaron, a mí tampoco, pero al hermano de Aizar les ha zumbado.
It plans to put people back on the moon by the end of the decade and then set up an international research station there. Beijing says its crewed space program is peaceful, but that's just one part of its space drive.
The People's Republic of China has moved breathtakingly fast.
No tendríais eso, patrimonio de la humanidad.
He outlined for reporters last week some of the ways
Que
China
soy
is
inferior a alguien.
with space-related developments. And he said they're keeping an eye on its lunar plans.
Those appear to be exploratory and scientific on the
¿Quién
surface.
prometió?
The Chinese aren't very transparent with what they do in space, and so we hope there's not a military component to that.
¿Qué no llega? ¿Qué no llega? Soy inferior a alguien. ¿Qué no llega? Follow the leader. Follow the leader. To the right or to the left? To the right or to the left? Follow the leader. To the right or to the left? Follow the leader. ¿Qué no llega de inferior a alguien?
Bringing foreign reporters to the launch center, about 1,000 miles west of Beijing, may help a little. During our visit, though security was tight, we were not
Estamos en Marte, no la Luna.
see and hear what the government wanted us to. I tried to ask a young observer at the astronaut send-off what he thought of it. I'm not calling him. How are you? Huh? I'm fine, thank you. What's your name? My name is Zhou Smil. You can't do interviews, Garth says. Moments later, we were hustled back onto a bus for the main event, the rocket launch, which was something they definitely wanted us to see and hear.
Dentro de la atmósfera.
News at the Jiuquan Satellite Launch Center in western China.
It was All Things Considered from NPR News. The best baguette in Paris must be pretty good, right? A Parisian bakery has been crowned the champion of the 31st annual Best Baguette in Paris competition, and NPR's Eleanor Beardsley went to the scene.
The line snakes out the door and down the block at Bakery Utopie in Paris's 11th arrondissement. The boulangerie has just been recognized with the best baguette in Paris. Parisian Guillaume Francois says it's not his usual bakery, but he had to come.
I do love bread because I'm French, of course, and I love nice bread, so that's why I really want